Rose Thompson sat quietly in her small kitchen, the scent of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. It was a simple home, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, but it was all she had left after her husband Tony passed away 6 months ago. At 67 years old, Rose had spent the last half of her life living for others, her children, her husband, her job at the local elementary school. Now, in the aftermath of Tony's death, she was left alone, her days marked only by the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the clock on the wall. Each morning, she followed the same routine: wake up, wash her face, make coffee, and then sit at the kitchen table with a book or the morning newspaper. She never minded the silence. At least she thought she didn't. It was the silence of her life now. She had grown used to it, but every day something unusual happened. Something that started as an oddity, but gradually began to stir an unsettling feeling deep inside her. Every morning, without fail, Rose would walk into her kitchen to find dirty dishes in the sink. At first, she thought it was a mistake. Maybe she had forgotten to clean them the night before, but that didn't make sense. Rose was meticulous. She had always been the type to wash every dish after dinner, leaving the kitchen spotless before heading to bed. Yet, there they were, 2 plates, 2 cups, a fork and knife, each piece sitting in the sink as though someone had eaten during the night. At first, it was just a little confusing. Did I forget? She would think to herself. Did I eat something in the middle of the night and not remember? It was easy enough to chalk it up to simple forgetfulness. After all, she was getting older. Her memory wasn't what it used to be, and the thought of it made her uneasy. But the pattern continued. Every morning, every time she walked into that kitchen, dirty dishes in the sink. It wasn't just that they appeared. It was the fact that they always looked like they had been used by 2 people, as if someone had shared a meal with her. She never heard any sounds in the night. No one ever came to visit, and yet these dishes appeared as though they had been used while she slept. She even made a point to leave the sink spotless before going to bed the night before. It was her way of closing out the day, ensuring that everything was in its place before the quiet of the night settled in. The more this happened, the more Rose started to wonder, was I losing my mind? She couldn't ignore the feeling that there was something deeply wrong, something that went beyond forgetfulness or old age. Was she sleepwalking? Was her mind playing tricks on her? Or worse, was someone entering her home while she slept? A chill ran down her spine at the thought. What could it mean? She found herself checking the locks on the doors, the windows. Everything seemed secure, and yet, every morning the dishes would be there. Am I going crazy? She whispered to herself one morning as she stared at the sink, her heart pounding in her chest. There was no answer, just the stillness of the house, mocking her confusion. The silence around her seemed to grow louder, pressing in on her from every corner. It wasn't just the dishes. It was the creeping feeling that something, or someone, was in her home when she wasn't aware of it. Her hands shook as she turned the faucet on, rinsing the plates as her thoughts swirled. How could I forget? She had never forgotten anything in her life. Was I imagining it all? But no matter how hard she tried to convince herself that it was just a trick of her aging mind, the dishes always returned. Every single morning. As the days turned into weeks, the confusion deepened. Rose had been through so much already, but this felt like something she couldn't explain. It wasn't just the dishes. It was something else, something more profound. A fear that she was slipping away, unnoticed by anyone but herself. She walked over to the small kitchen table, her coffee now cold in her hands. Her heart felt heavy as she stared out the window at the small garden Tony had always tended to. Was she truly losing her mind? For the first time in her life, Rose was truly afraid. She had always prided herself on being sharp, on having a clear mind. But now, every morning when she woke up to find the dirty dishes in the sink, a deep unease began to take root. She had thought it was just a momentary lapse in memory, maybe some forgetfulness from getting older. But the pattern, the regularity of it, made her question everything. Was this what it felt like? Was she beginning to lose control of herself? Was she slipping into the fog of Alzheimer's? The thought terrified her. She had heard stories, seen the toll it took on people she knew. It wasn't just the fear of forgetting names or places or faces. It was the thought that one day she might wake up and not even recognize herself. The idea of losing her independence, of forgetting who she was, seemed like the most unimaginable fate. She didn't talk to anyone about her fear, not her children, not her neighbors. She didn't want them to think she was weak or losing her grip. It wasn't just the dirty dishes. It was the quiet feeling that perhaps something larger was slipping away from her, something that no one could help her hold on to. Each day felt like a new puzzle, and Rose was the only one who could see the missing pieces. After finding the dishes again one morning, she walked to the fridge, hoping it would offer some comfort. Maybe she could distract herself, grab something to eat, and forget about it all. But then, as her hands reached for the chicken she had meal prepped the night before, her heart skipped a beat. The container was half empty. Rose stared at it, her eyes wide with disbelief. She knew she hadn't eaten that much food. She hadn't even touched it since last night. Had someone been in her fridge? But no, everything was locked up tight. The fridge had always been locked at night, just like her back door, which she checked compulsively. Still, this didn't make sense. She thought back to the last few days. Last week she had noticed the same thing. Food was missing. She hadn't eaten it, and no one had come to visit. At first she thought she was mistaken. Maybe she had eaten more than she realized. Or maybe Tony had left some behind before he passed. But that wasn't possible either. Tony had been gone for months. "I'm losing it," she muttered under her breath, her voice trembling. The words felt like a confession, as if by saying them aloud, she would make them real. Her grip on reality seemed more fragile with each passing day. Her mind spun with questions. Was she sleepwalking? Was she getting up in the middle of the night, making herself meals, and not even remembering it? Could this be the start of something worse? Was she sleepwalking and eating without even realizing it? She tried to convince herself that it wasn't possible. But the evidence, the dirty dishes, the missing food, told a different story. Her hands shook as she closed the fridge door, her mind racing. The anxiety was overwhelming. Was she the one eating the food? Was she making meals, and then forgetting about it when she woke up? Or was it something else? Could it be someone else in the house, taking her food and leaving the dishes behind? Every time she turned the corner to the kitchen, she half expected to find someone standing there, someone who knew her better than she knew herself. She wondered if the person taking her food was a thief, or worse, someone who had been silently living in her house, undetected, just like the dirty dishes. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was losing control. She had always been in charge of her life, her home, but now everything felt like it was slipping through her fingers and she couldn't stop it. No matter how hard she tried to make sense of it, the unease settled deeper into her bones. Her mind wouldn't let her rest. She needed answers, but she couldn't even begin to understand the questions she was asking herself. She tried to distract herself, going for long walks in the neighborhood, hoping the fresh air would clear her mind. But the thought of the dirty dishes, the disappearing food, followed her like a shadow. She looked at the faces of the people around her, smiling, chatting, and she wondered how they did it. How they lived without this constant undercurrent of fear. Rose was scared. Scared that her mind was betraying her, scared that she was becoming a stranger in her own body. But most of all, she was scared of being alone with her thoughts. She longed for someone to tell her everything would be okay, that this was just a phase, that she wasn't losing her mind. But there was no one, just the silence of her home, the eerie quiet that reminded her every morning that something was wrong. "Am I really losing it?" she whispered to herself, the weight of the question pressing down on her chest. Is this the beginning of the end? The days blurred together for Rose, each one feeling heavier than the last. It wasn't just the dirty dishes or the missing food that made her stomach churn. It was the growing sense of unease that seemed to be creeping into every corner of her home. The house that once felt like a safe haven now felt more like a cage, a place where something unknown was lurking just out of sight. One evening, after cleaning up from dinner and washing her dishes like always, Rose walked toward the back door. She had been feeling this strange discomfort for a while now, and it was time to face her fears. The back door was an old wooden one, with a simple lock. Tony had always checked it before bed, a nightly ritual Rose never thought to question. But now it was different. Now she needed to know. Was she the one forgetting to lock it? Or was someone else coming in? She stood in the dim light of the kitchen, her hand hovering over the door handle. Her pulse quickened, and for a moment she hesitated. But the thought of what might be happening, the uncertainty gnawing at her, pushed her forward. She turned the handle and checked the lock. It was locked, just as it should be. Rose let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, and turned away, heading toward the living room. But something inside her wouldn't let it go. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was just her imagination, or maybe she was losing her grip, but she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in her gut. So she made a decision that night. She would check the door again in the morning. Maybe, just maybe, she was overlooking something. The next morning, as Rose went about her usual routine, her heart skipped a beat as she approached the kitchen. There in front of her was the back door, slightly ajar. It wasn't wide open, just enough for her to see the faintest gap between the door and the frame. Her breath caught in her throat. Her hand trembled as she reached for the door handle, pushing it fully open. The lock was undone. She felt a cold shiver run through her spine. Had I forgotten to lock it? She thought, but deep down she knew that wasn't possible. She had checked it the night before. She was sure of it. The nagging doubt returned. Was someone coming into her house while she slept? Or worse, was she doing it herself in her sleep? Was she sleepwalking, forgetting to lock the door? She went to the sink and sure enough, there they were, the dirty dishes. The same 2 plates, the same cups, the same silverware, all sitting in the sink as if someone had used them in the middle of the night. The realization hit her like a wave. This isn't me, she thought, her pulse quickening. Someone else is coming in here, but who? Who would do such a thing? It wasn't as if she had any close friends or family who would just show up without warning. Her children had their own lives, and her husband, well, he had been gone for months now. She was truly alone. Rose's thoughts spiraled, and her anxiety only grew. She walked to the fridge and opened it, dreading what she might find. Just as she feared, the food was gone. It wasn't just a little missing. It was enough to make her wonder who could have taken it. She hadn't eaten that much, and no one had been in her home. Am I doing this in my sleep? She wondered, but that thought seemed impossible. No, this doesn't make sense. Her mind raced, the logical part of her trying to piece everything together. But every new discovery only deepened her confusion. The food, the dishes, the unlocked door. It was too much to ignore. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to tell anyone. She couldn't bear the thought of someone finding out that she might be losing her mind. That was a fear she couldn't face. The next night, Rose made a decision. She would check the back door again, and this time, she would be certain. She was determined to find out if she was simply forgetting to lock it, or if someone else was truly coming into her house. As the night fell and the house grew still, Rose stood in the kitchen, waiting. Her eyes fixed on the back door, her heart pounding in her chest. Every creak of the floorboard, every whisper of the wind outside, seemed to echo in her ears. Finally, she couldn't take it any longer. She tiptoed toward the back door and checked it. The lock was secure. She breathed a sigh of relief, but as she stood there, she felt a chill run through her spine, as though someone or something was watching her. Was it me? She wondered, but deep down she knew it wasn't. There was something more to this than simple forgetfulness. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that something or someone was coming into her house without her permission. The fear continued to build. Rose felt helpless, as if she was being trapped in her own home. Am I losing control? She thought, staring at the lock on the door, unsure of what to believe anymore. Am I the one doing this, or is someone else in my house? She didn't know the answer, but one thing was certain. She couldn't keep living like this. Each night the house grew quieter. Rose found herself listening for every little noise, the soft creak of the floorboards, the gust of wind rattling the windows, the distant hum of traffic. But with each passing day, the silence became oppressive, like the house itself was holding its breath. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something that lurked just beyond her awareness, something she could neither see nor touch. The fear was becoming all-consuming. Every corner of her house felt haunted. Every shadow seemed to stretch a little longer. It wasn't just the dishes in the sink or the missing food anymore. It was the door that she knew she had locked, but was always unlocked when she woke. It was the gnawing suspicion that someone was coming into her house while she slept, someone moving around in the night, making themselves at home without her knowing. Her thoughts twisted in on themselves. She had checked the locks. She had looked at the camera footage. She had even spent nights sitting in the dark, staring at the back door, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. Nothing obvious anyway. There were no intruders caught on camera, no break-ins, no signs of forced entry. Just the dirty dishes, the missing food, the unlocked door. She couldn't understand it. And the more she couldn't understand it, the more her fear grew. What was happening to her? Was she sleepwalking, moving around her house in the middle of the night and forgetting everything in the morning? Or was someone truly coming in and out of her home without leaving a trace? The thought of an intruder was terrifying, but the thought that it might be her own mind betraying her was worse. The paranoia set in like a shadow creeping over her, clouding her every thought. Every creak of the floor seemed amplified in her ears, every gust of wind a signal that something, or someone, was near. The house, once a place of safety, now felt like a prison, and Rose felt trapped, unable to escape the spiral of doubt and fear that consumed her. One evening, as the darkness crept in and the house seemed quieter than usual, Rose sat in the living room, her hands trembling around her mug of lukewarm tea. She stared at the wall, lost in thought. She was scared, so scared. She hadn't felt this way in years. Even before Tony had passed, she had always been strong, self-assured. But now, every sound in the night felt like a threat. Every shadow, a warning. She couldn't take it any longer. She had to talk to someone she could trust, someone who might have answers. The thought of confiding in her children brought up a deep, uncomfortable feeling of guilt. What if they thought she was just growing old? What if they dismissed her fears, brushing them off as the ramblings of an elderly woman losing her mind? But she had to try. She had to know if she was going crazy, or if there was something truly wrong. Her fingers hovered over the phone for several moments before she finally dialed her daughter Trish's number. The phone rang, and Rose's heart pounded in her chest. When Trish picked up, Rose forced herself to speak. "Trish," she said, her voice trembling. "I need to talk to you. Something's been happening here and I don't know what to do." "What's wrong, Mom?" Trish's voice was soft, concerned, but Rose couldn't shake the feeling that her daughter was already judging her. I don't know how to explain it, but I keep finding dirty dishes in the sink every morning, and my food keeps disappearing from the fridge. The back door is unlocked every morning, and I'm sure I lock it at night. I'm scared, Trish. I feel like someone's coming into the house when I'm asleep, and I don't know what to do." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Rose could almost hear Trish processing the words, trying to make sense of them. "Mom, are you sure you're not just forgetting? I know you're upset about Dad, and I think you're just stressed out." I'm not forgetting, Trish," Rose snapped before she could stop herself. She took a shaky breath, her hands gripping the phone tighter. "I know what I'm doing. I've always been meticulous. I'm not imagining this." She felt a pang of guilt for raising her voice. But the frustration, the fear, had built up so much that it spilled over. The silence on the other end was deafening. "Maybe you should talk to someone. Mom, I don't know if this is something you're dealing with on your own, but I don't want you to feel alone in this." Trish's voice was soft, but it felt distant, like she didn't quite understand. Rose's heart sank. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell Trish that she wasn't imagining it, that she wasn't crazy, but the words felt stuck in her throat. Instead, she hung up the phone gently, the weight of her fear pressing down on her chest. She stared at the phone for a moment, wondering if anyone would ever believe her. She wondered if she would ever find the truth. Was it her, or was someone else in her house? It had been weeks since Rose had begun to question her sanity, and every night, the unease grew stronger. She had tried to rationalize it, tried to convince herself that it was just her mind playing tricks on her, but deep down, she knew something was happening. Something she couldn't explain, something beyond the normal realm of forgetfulness. The dishes, the food, the unlocked door. It wasn't just the fear anymore. It was the feeling of being watched, of being invaded in her own home. Her own space, once filled with memories of Tony, now felt like a place where she was no longer in control. She couldn't take it any longer. Rose had to know the truth. She had to know if she was really losing her mind or if something more sinister was going on. That night, she made a decision. Rose had seen security cameras in the stores, the little gadgets that promised to give you peace of mind. Maybe, just maybe, a small camera would answer the questions that had been haunting her. She bought one online, a small, discreet camera that could be set up in the kitchen. The idea was simple: catch the person, if there even was a person, coming into her home at night. If it was her, if she was doing this in her sleep, then at least she could confirm it. And if it was someone else, well, she would finally know who it was and why they were coming in. The camera arrived a few days later. Rose set it up in the corner of the kitchen, facing the sink and the back door. It was so small that it blended in with the surroundings, tucked between the dishes on the counter. She turned it on, checked the connection, and sat back in her chair, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. Tonight she would know the truth. She didn't sleep that night. Her mind raced with every possibility, every scenario. Could it really be someone entering her home? Or was she, indeed, sleepwalking, moving about the house in a daze? The fear gnawed at her, but she clung to the hope that the camera would bring answers. Morning came slowly, the light creeping in through the window. Rose sat at the kitchen table, staring at the camera on her phone, her finger hovering over the playback button. For a moment she hesitated, unsure of what she might see. Would the footage confirm her worst fears? Or would it give her the peace of mind she desperately sought? With a deep breath, she pressed play. The first few minutes were uneventful. The kitchen was still, empty except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Rose watched, heart in her throat, as the night unfolded on her screen. But then something happened. At around 2:15 a.m., the back door creaked open. Rose's breath caught in her throat as a figure stepped inside, silhouetted against the dark kitchen. It was a man. He moved quietly, almost cautiously, as if he was aware of the quiet, sacred space he was entering. He opened the fridge, pulling out a container of rice and some beans. He set them on the counter, then carefully warmed them up in the microwave. Rose's stomach tightened. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Who was this man? Why was he in her house? The man ate slowly, as though savoring every bite. But it wasn't just the food that caught Rose's attention. It was the way he handled everything. After eating, he washed the dishes. Not thoroughly, but enough to show that he wasn't there to destroy or steal. He wiped the dishes and placed them back on the counter. He even cleaned the surface where he had eaten, as if he was trying to leave no trace of his presence. Rose sat frozen in her chair, her eyes wide with disbelief. The man didn't steal anything. He didn't cause any harm. He just ate. And then, after taking a small portion of food with him, he left quietly, closing the door behind him and leaving no sign of entry except for the unlocked door, the dirty dishes, and the missing food. Rose felt a wave of conflicting emotions crash over her. Fear was still there, but now it was joined by something else, something softer, compassion. She watched the footage again, this time more carefully. The man, who she had never seen before, seemed so vulnerable. His clothes were tattered, his face dirty, and his movements were slow, almost hesitant, as though he was afraid to be caught. He wasn't breaking in to steal or cause trouble. He was just trying to survive. He was hungry. As Rose sat in silence, the realization hit her with force. This man was not a burglar. He wasn't a threat. He was someone who had fallen on hard times, someone who was invisible to the world, someone who had no place to go but her house. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. How could she have been so scared of him? But she couldn't ignore the fear that still lingered. Why had he chosen her house? Why her of all people? And why had he been coming in night after night? Who is this man? And why is he doing this? Rose asked herself, her heart heavy with a mix of sympathy and confusion. She wasn't sure whether to feel angry or compassionate, fearful or understanding. All she knew was that her world had just been turned upside down. Rose had set out to find answers, but what she found was something far more complicated. Rose sat in the kitchen long after the sun had set, her eyes glued to the footage on her phone. She watched the man once more, his frail body, the way he handled her kitchen with careful reverence, as though it was the first real meal he'd had in days. There was no malice in him, no anger, just a deep, aching hunger and a quiet dignity that Rose hadn't expected. As the video ended, Rose let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. He's not dangerous, she thought to herself, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. He's just hungry. She had spent so many sleepless nights ruminating over the idea that someone might be breaking into her house. But the footage had shown her something she hadn't considered. This wasn't a thief. This wasn't a criminal. This was a man, struggling to survive in a world that had forgotten him. Rose's fear slowly started to shift into something else. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. Compassion. The next morning, as she washed the dishes, the weight of what she had seen the night before weighed heavily on her heart. She couldn't shake the image of him, hunched over in her kitchen, eating with the same quiet desperation she'd seen in the eyes of the homeless people she passed by on her walks. She thought of the pain in his eyes, the way he treated her home with more care than she'd ever expected. I can't let him go hungry again. Without thinking, Rose took a plate from the cupboard and filled it with a hearty portion of the leftovers she had from the night before, some chicken stew, potatoes, and vegetables. She wrapped it tightly in foil and set it on the kitchen counter. But that wasn't enough. There had to be something more. She grabbed a piece of notebook paper, a pen, and wrote a simple note. You're welcome to eat. Take care of yourself. She placed it neatly on top of the food, hoping it would convey what words could not. For a moment, Rose stood there, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea if he would take the food. She had no idea if he would even show up tonight, or if he had been scared off by the camera. But she knew one thing. This was her choice. She was choosing to offer kindness, to extend a hand, even if it meant confronting the fear she had been holding on to for weeks. That night, she set the food out again and waited. The house felt quieter than usual, and Rose found herself checking the clock every few minutes. She couldn't stop the worry from creeping back in. What if he doesn't come? What if he's scared? But as the hours passed, she finally saw the figure again on the camera feed, slipping through the back door with the same hesitant movement as before. Her heart softened as she watched him stop, noticing the food on the table. He didn't take it immediately. He stood there for a moment, looking at the plate, as though he couldn't believe it was meant for him. Then, slowly, he walked over to the counter, picked up the food, and glanced at the note. He didn't say anything, but the look on his face told Rose everything she needed to know. It was gratitude mixed with disbelief. He was stunned by the simple act of kindness. For a few moments, he sat down at the table, eating the food with the same quiet reverence as before. But this time, after finishing his meal, he did something different. He cleaned the dishes. He didn't leave them in the sink like he had before. He washed them carefully, dried them, and put them away, leaving no trace of his presence except for the empty plate on the counter. Rose watched from her phone, her heart swelling with emotion. The fear she had felt only a few nights ago was gone, replaced by something she couldn't quite explain. She had offered him food, yes, but he had given her something in return: his respect. He hadn't just taken the food, he had treated her home with care. He had shown her that despite everything, there was still decency in the world. She sat back in her chair, tears welling up in her eyes. The weight of everything she had been carrying, the fear, the isolation, the loneliness, seemed to lift just a little. Rose had made a choice. She had chosen compassion over fear, and in doing so, she had not only helped someone else, but she had helped herself too. She had found a sense of peace, a connection, even in the strangest of circumstances. I was scared, Rose whispered to herself, the words barely audible, but I knew I couldn't let him go hungry. The next morning, when she checked the kitchen, the plate was gone, and the kitchen was as tidy as it had ever been. The door was still locked, and the house felt different. Rose felt different. The fear that had plagued her for so long was slowly being replaced with something more powerful. The realization that there was goodness in the world, and that even in the face of her own doubts, kindness could still find its way in. The next few days passed in a quiet haze, but something had changed in Rose. Each morning, she left food out for the man with a note, and each night he returned to eat. The cycle felt more natural now, as though it was no longer about fear or uncertainty, but about something deeper. A need to help, to reach out, to offer a little kindness in a world that felt so disconnected. And then, one night, he didn't just take the food and leave. Rose had been sitting in her favorite armchair, a book in her hands but her mind elsewhere, when she heard the faint sound of the back door creaking open. She didn't move immediately, still unsure of how to navigate this growing connection. But this time the man didn't head straight for the food. Instead, he hesitated, then turned, his shadow cast against the wall by the light from the kitchen. She felt a flutter of nervousness in her chest, but she stood up and walked toward the kitchen. There he was, standing at the counter with a plate of food in front of him, but this time he wasn't eating. He was just standing there looking at the food, as though it was something more than just a meal. Rose swallowed hard. She had been waiting for this moment, not knowing exactly what to say or do, but here it was. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked, her voice a little too loud in the silence of the room. She regretted it immediately, wondering if she had overstepped. But the man didn't flinch. Instead, he turned slowly, his eyes soft, yet full of something she couldn't quite place. "You don't mind?" he asked, his voice rough, as if it hadn't been used in a long time. Rose nodded. "Of course. I have some fresh brewed in the pot." She hesitated for a moment, then added, "It's not much, but I thought you might like it." He nodded back, a faint, almost embarrassed smile on his face. As Rose poured the coffee, she noticed his hands, worn and rough, fingers curled like branches twisted by the wind. His clothes, too, were frayed and tattered. There was nothing about him that resembled the man who had been in her house every night, silently eating and leaving behind a clean kitchen. This man was so much more than that. He was a person who had seen and felt the world's cruelty in a way Rose couldn't imagine. When she handed him the cup, their fingers brushed lightly, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, he sat down at the table, his eyes meeting hers for the first time in days. "I never meant to take advantage of you," he said softly, looking away as if ashamed. "I didn't know who else to turn to. I've been out there, on the streets for a while now." Rose sat down across from him, her heart aching. She had suspected as much. He had the look of a man who had seen the harshness of life, the kind of weariness in his eyes that couldn't be faked. But hearing it from him felt different. It felt real, personal. "You don't have to explain," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I understand." He sighed deeply, running a hand through his tangled beard. "It's not easy to talk about. I used to have everything. A business, a family, a home, but things change. The economy tanked. My business went under, and after that, everything just fell apart." His voice cracked slightly, and he wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Rose sat back, her mind racing. A business, a family? She hadn't expected this. This man, this stranger, had once had a life so different from the one he now lived, a life that had been ripped away by circumstances he couldn't control. "I lost my wife and kids," he continued, his voice tinged with sorrow. "My wife couldn't handle the stress. She took the kids and left. They think I'm a failure. They probably don't even know I'm still alive. They haven't reached out in years." Rose's heart broke as she listened. This man wasn't just hungry for food. He was hungry for connection. He was starving for the kind of love and understanding that so many of us took for granted. "I'm sorry," Rose said quietly, not knowing what else to say. She had no words to fix this, no magic phrase to make the pain go away, but in that moment, she knew something had shifted between them. "I don't even know why I'm telling you this," he said, looking down at his coffee, embarrassed. "You've done so much for me already." Rose placed a hand on the table, closer to his, but not touching. She didn't need to speak. Her gesture was enough. She could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the years of disappointment and pain that he had carried with him. He wasn't just a man sneaking into her house for food. He was a man who had been broken by life in ways she could never fully understand. But Rose understood something else too. He wasn't a stranger. Not anymore. As they sat in the quiet kitchen, sharing coffee in a moment of unexpected intimacy, Rose realized that in helping him, she had unknowingly helped herself. She had opened her heart again, not just to someone who needed her, but to the idea that life could still surprise her. Even in her loneliness, she had found a connection. This man, Mark, wasn't just a homeless stranger. He was someone who had been battered by life, just like her. And perhaps, together, they could heal the wounds that had been growing in their hearts for so long. Rose leaned back in her chair, feeling an unexpected warmth in her chest. "You're not alone anymore," she said softly, her voice steady. "I'm here." The days following their conversation were different. Rose could feel it, the shift in the air, the change in her home. For the first time in months, the house no longer felt cold and empty. There was a warmth that hadn't been there before, an unspoken understanding that hung in the air between her and Mark. At first, it was just little things. Mark helped her clean up after meals, took the garbage out without being asked, and even helped fix the faucet that had been leaking for weeks. He did it quietly, without fanfare, as though these were the simple tasks of a man who had been living in a world where he had forgotten his worth. But to Rose, each act felt like a thread weaving them closer together. As the days turned into weeks, Rose began to notice something else. Something in herself that had been buried under grief and fear. It wasn't just about giving food to a hungry man or offering a place to stay. It was more than that. It was the way she felt when Mark smiled at her, when he thanked her for the little things she did for him. She had forgotten what it felt like to be appreciated for just being, for being present, for offering kindness, for opening her heart without fear. Mark didn't just take from her. He gave back. His laughter had started to fill the rooms again, and his quiet presence brought an unexpected peace to her home. Rose had spent so many years living for others, raising her children, taking care of Tony, working to provide for her family, but in Mark's company, she found herself living for the first time in years. One afternoon, as Rose prepared dinner, Mark sat at the kitchen table, carefully going over a stack of papers. He had been looking for work, trying to get back on his feet after everything that had happened. Rose had offered him a few odd jobs around the house, but she knew he was capable of more. He had a skill set. He had once been a business owner, after all. "Rose, I was thinking," he said, his voice hesitant. "I don't want to take advantage of you. You've already done so much for me, but I was wondering, do you think maybe we could do something together? I could help you with your cooking, and maybe I could even build a small stand outside. You know, something to sell food. A little stand for people to stop by, grab a meal, something simple." Rose looked up from the stove, her heart racing at the thought. A food stand. It was such a simple idea, but in that moment, it felt like a lifeline for both of them. Rose had spent most of her life in the kitchen, cooking for her family, creating meals that made people feel at home. And Mark, well, he had the hands to build things, to create, to rebuild his life in a way that felt real. "I think that's a wonderful idea," Rose said, her voice steady but filled with excitement. "We could start small. Maybe just some homemade sandwiches or baked goods. I've been thinking about doing something with all the recipes I used to make for the kids." Mark's face lit up. "Really? You'd be willing to do this?" Rose nodded, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "We can make this work. Let's take it step by step." In that moment, she realized that this wasn't just about helping someone else. It was about creating something together. It was about finding a new purpose, a new way to live. Rose didn't know if this food stand would be successful, but she knew that for the first time in a long time, she had something to look forward to. A project, a partnership, something that was all her own, and Mark's too. As the days passed, they worked together, brainstorming ideas for their new venture. Rose taught Mark some of her old recipes, and he helped her set up a small area in the backyard to build their stand. They laughed as they worked, sharing stories from their pasts, their dreams, and the uncertainty that had once defined their lives. For Rose, the act of creating something meaningful for herself was more than just a distraction. It was a rebirth. She hadn't felt this alive in years, not since Tony had passed, not since she had found herself alone in this house. And yet here she was, not just surviving, but thriving, building something real with someone who had come into her life when she least expected it. In the evenings, after the work was done, they would sit outside on the porch, watching the sunset, the quiet hum of the world around them. It was in these moments, as she sat next to Mark, that Rose felt something stir inside her, something tender, something hopeful. Maybe it wasn't too late for me to feel loved again. The thought came quietly, almost as if it had been waiting for her to hear it. Rose had spent so many years taking care of everyone else, putting herself last. But now, as she watched Mark talk about his plans for the stand, as she saw the hope in his eyes, something deep inside her stirred. She wasn't just a caretaker anymore. She was a partner. She was someone who could love and be loved, no matter what her age, no matter what her past. It wasn't too late. It had been weeks since Rose and Mark started building their small food stand. Each day was a new challenge, but it was one they tackled together, side by side. What began as a practical solution to their financial struggles had blossomed into something much more profound, a shared journey of rebuilding their lives, of creating something out of nothing. As they worked, Rose found herself paying attention to Mark in ways she hadn't expected. It wasn't just his help with the food stand or the way he had so carefully crafted every detail of their little setup. It was the small moments, the quiet gestures that made her heart flutter unexpectedly. One evening, as Rose prepared dinner, Mark had wandered into the kitchen, his hands still dusty from working outside. He washed his hands quickly and then silently moved to the counter, where Rose was chopping vegetables. Without a word, he grabbed the knife from her hand, gently placing it down and then taking over, his hands steady and confident as he finished the task for her. "Thank you," Rose said, startled by the simple act. His touch was gentle, his movements deliberate, as though he was taking care of her in a way that she hadn't allowed anyone to do in a long time. "It's the least I can do," Mark replied, his voice soft but earnest. "You've done so much for me, Rose, I can't ever repay you." Rose's heart softened. The way he said it, so unassuming, so humble, touched her more deeply than she expected. She had known, of course, that Mark was grateful, but it was moments like this that made her realize just how much his kindness meant to her. It was the way he took care of the little things without being asked. It was the way he paid attention to her, the way he listened to her stories, the way he always made sure she was okay before thinking of himself. It wasn't just gratitude. It was something deeper, something Rose hadn't realized she had been missing for so long. She couldn't ignore the way her heart skipped a beat when he smiled at her, or the way she felt when he gently touched her hand after a long day of work. It was a quiet, unspoken connection that was beginning to bloom inside her. One evening, as they sat together after closing the food stand, Rose looked at Mark, her thoughts drifting. The soft glow of the streetlights illuminated his face, and for the first time, she saw him not as a man who had fallen on hard times, not as someone who needed her help, but as someone who had become a part of her life in a way she couldn't fully explain. "I think I'm falling in love with him," she thought, a wave of surprise washing over her. The realization hit her with such force that she almost gasped. She had spent so many years alone after Tony had passed, and for a long time, she had convinced herself that love was something that belonged to the past, something she would never feel again. But here it was, quietly slipping into her life without warning, just as unexpected as the way Mark had entered her home months ago. She had spent her life being a caretaker, being a mother, a wife, a provider, but now in her late 60s, she was learning that love could come again. She wasn't too old. She wasn't too broken. She was just a woman who had lived through loss, who had survived, and who still had so much left to give. "Mark," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I never thought I'd find love again. But here it is, with you." Mark looked up at her, his eyes soft and searching. He didn't say anything at first, but his silence was filled with understanding. Slowly, he reached across the table, his hand resting gently on hers. "I didn't think so either," he said quietly. "But it feels real, doesn't it?" Rose nodded, her chest tight with emotions she couldn't quite put into words. The fear, the uncertainty, the doubt, all of it melted away in that moment. Love had come quietly, unexpectedly, and now it felt like the most natural thing in the world. She hadn't realized until now how much she had longed for this. To feel cared for, to feel loved, to feel like she wasn't invisible anymore. For so long, she had lived her life in the shadows of her own grief, focusing on others, on what they needed. But now, in Mark's eyes, she saw something else. She saw someone who wanted to be with her, who cared for her not out of pity or obligation, but because he truly wanted to. Rose squeezed his hand, her heart full. "Love doesn't have an age limit," she said softly, the words more of a revelation than a statement. "It's never too late," Mark smiled, his face lighting up as he squeezed her hand in return. "No, it's never too late." As they sat together, their hands intertwined, Rose realized that in finding Mark, she hadn't just found love again. She had found herself again, the woman who deserved to be loved, who still had so much to offer. And with Mark by her side, she knew that the best parts of her life were still ahead of her. As Rose and Mark's bond deepened, so did the whispers. At first, it was just the occasional glance from a neighbor, a sideways look that made her feel as though the world was seeing something she couldn't see herself. But soon the whispers became words, and those words became more difficult to ignore. It started subtly. Mrs. Henderson, the sweet old lady who lived across the street, would stop by for a quick chat, but always seemed to throw in a little comment about Rose's new companion. "You know, I was just telling my husband, Rose, it's nice that you've found someone to talk to. Must be nice to have someone around again, especially with all that's happened." Rose had smiled politely, pretending she didn't understand the subtext, but the comment had stung. She had never been the type to care about what others thought of her, but now, with Mark by her side, it felt different. His presence in her life had opened up a door she wasn't sure she was ready to walk through. It wasn't just the neighbors. Rose's children, too, began to voice their concerns. It was Bobby, her son, who first broached the subject during one of his occasional visits. He had come over to check on her, and they were sitting at the kitchen table when he brought it up, his tone careful, but laced with disapproval. "Mom, I don't know about this arrangement," Bobby said, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "I mean, I get it, you're lonely. But this man, Mark, he's younger than you. You don't even know him that well. He's been living in your house for months now. People are going to talk." Rose felt the blood drain from her face. She had been waiting for this moment, but she wasn't ready. Her heart raced as she looked at Bobby, trying to find the words that would explain everything she had felt in the past few months. But instead of the understanding she had hoped for, there was just judgment in his eyes. "He's a good man, Bobby," Rose said, her voice shaking with a mix of hurt and frustration. "He's not just someone I'm taking care of. He's my friend, and if you can't see that, then maybe I'm not the one who's wrong." Bobby's eyes widened with surprise, but he didn't back down. "It's just not..." "Right, Mom, you're 67 years old. You've been married to Dad for how many years? And now you're living with a man, this man of all people? People are going to think you've lost your mind." The words hit Rose harder than she expected. She had always prided herself on being independent, on making her own choices, but hearing her son say that hurt more than she had anticipated. It felt like a betrayal. She had spent so much of her life living for her family, living for others. But now, in her heart, she knew she wasn't ready to give up what she had with Mark, just because people didn't understand. "You don't know him like I do," she replied, her voice steadier now. "You don't know what he's been through. He's not perfect, but he's a person who's been through things you can't even imagine. And so have I." Bobby looked away, his jaw clenched. "I just don't want you to get hurt, Mom. You deserve better." But Rose could see the unspoken judgment in his eyes, the way he seemed to dismiss Mark, to dismiss her choices. It was a familiar sting, one she had felt so many times in her life. It was the weight of expectations, the pressure to be who others wanted her to be. For the first time, Rose realized that she didn't have to bear that weight anymore. That night, as Rose sat alone in the living room, her mind replaying Bobby's words, she found herself thinking about the life she had lived. For years, she had been a wife, a mother, a caretaker. She had lived her life based on the needs and expectations of others. But now, for the first time in so long, she was finally living for herself. The next day, the neighbors began to gossip openly. Rose could hear their conversations as she walked to the mailbox, their voices low but unmistakable. "Did you hear about Rose?" Mrs. Henderson's voice carried across the street. "She's living with that man. A younger man, no less. People don't even know who he is." Rose paused in her tracks, her breath catching in her chest. But this time, the sting was different. She felt something shift inside her, something stronger than the fear of judgment, stronger than the pain of criticism. For the first time, she stood tall, lifting her chin, and walked past them without a word. They didn't understand, and that was okay. She wasn't living for them. A few days later, Trish stopped by to visit. She had heard the rumors too, and when she sat down at the kitchen table with her mother, her face was tight with concern. "Mom, I just don't think you're thinking clearly," Trish said, her voice softer than Bobby's but no less worried. "I know you're lonely, but this isn't healthy. He's not even part of the family." Rose looked at her daughter, her heart heavy with both love and frustration. She had spent her entire life being what others needed her to be. But now, she was beginning to understand something that had eluded her for so long. She wasn't living for anyone else anymore. She was living for her. "I'm not asking for your approval, Trish," Rose said, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. "I'm living my life now. Not for you, not for Bobby, for me. And I don't need anyone's permission to be happy." Trish stared at her for a moment, a mixture of disbelief and understanding in her eyes, and then slowly she nodded. "I just want you to be careful, Mom. I don't want to see you get hurt." Rose smiled softly, the weight of her daughter's concern washing over her. She wasn't angry anymore. She was empowered. "I'm not asking for anyone's approval, Trish. I'm choosing to live for myself. And if that's wrong, then so be it." As Rose stood up, feeling a quiet strength inside her, she knew that this was the beginning of something new, something that had nothing to do with the judgment of others, and everything to do with the truth she had discovered about herself. The days following the tense conversations with her children were difficult. Rose had always been the kind of mother who put everyone else first, who made sure her family was happy, healthy, and well cared for. But now, for the first time, she was living for herself, standing tall in her choices, even when they weren't understood by those she loved most. The judgment from her son Bobby, the whispers from the neighbors, and the disapproving glances from her daughter Trish had stung. But in the end, Rose knew she had to live her truth. Weeks passed, and the food stand began to take off. Rose and Mark worked side by side, building something from the ground up. The small corner of their yard that once seemed barren now had a sturdy, well-built stand with a sign that read Rose's Kitchen. They had their first few customers from the neighborhood, some of whom had whispered about their relationship at first, but soon the delicious smells of fresh-baked goods and savory dishes drew people in. Slowly, the stand became a local favorite. Every morning, Rose would prepare the meals with love, and Mark, always eager to help, would manage the counter, greet customers, and make sure everything ran smoothly. There was something magical about the way they worked together. What started as a way to make a living became so much more. It became a shared dream, a project that tied their hearts together. And in the quiet moments between serving customers, they would sit at the back of the stand, their hands touching, smiling at each other as if they were the only two people in the world. It was on one of those quiet mornings when Rose received an unexpected knock on the door. She opened it to find Trish standing there, her face hesitant but soft with a warmth Rose hadn't seen in months. "Mom," Trish began, her voice shaky. "I've been thinking a lot about everything you said, about you living for yourself, and I see now that you're happy. Really happy." Rose's heart swelled with emotion as she looked at her daughter. Trish's expression was no longer filled with worry, no longer clouded by judgment. There was acceptance in her eyes now, a recognition that her mother had chosen a path that made her feel alive again. "I'm sorry, Mom," Trish continued, stepping closer. "I didn't understand. I was scared, but I see now that Mark, he's good for you. He makes you happy." Rose smiled through the tears that threatened to fall. She hadn't realized just how much she needed this moment, how much she had longed for her children's acceptance. Mark had given her the strength to stand up for herself, but this was the reconciliation she hadn't expected, but desperately needed. Trish reached out and pulled her into a warm hug. "I'm glad you found love again, Mom," she whispered. "I just want you to be happy." Tears welled up in Rose's eyes as she hugged her daughter back. The weight of the past few months, the tension, the fear, the isolation, seemed to lift with that simple act of love. Rose had found her voice, and now she had found her family's understanding too. As the weeks went by, Bobby came around as well. One afternoon, he showed up at the food stand with his wife, Karen, and the kids in tow. The tension was still there, but it had softened. Bobby didn't say much at first, but when he took a bite of Rose's homemade mac and cheese, his eyes lit up, and for the first time in a long time, he smiled genuinely. "I guess I was wrong," he said, a slight grin tugging at his lips. "This is really good, Mom. I'm happy you found something you love." Rose felt a wave of relief wash over her as Bobby clapped Mark on the back, his earlier reservations fading with each passing day. The walls between them slowly crumbled, and the distance that had once seemed insurmountable was now just a memory. Her family was learning to accept her choices, to see her happiness, not as a threat, but as a new beginning. With Mark by her side, Rose had not only rebuilt her life, but had found the courage to embrace new possibilities. She wasn't just the mother, the grandmother, the woman who had always given so much. She was Rose, a woman who had learned that it was never too late to start over, to find love, and to live life fully. The food stand thrived. They had regulars now, neighbors, friends, and even strangers who had heard about the delicious meals being served. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, built with their sweat, their laughter, and their shared dreams. And as the days passed, Rose realized that this was just the beginning of the life she had always wanted, a life filled with purpose, with love, and with the freedom to live authentically. In the quiet moments, as they closed the stand at the end of a long day, Rose would look at Mark, his hand resting gently on hers, and feel a deep sense of contentment. They had created something beautiful together, a life that was built not on the opinions of others, but on the strength of their love, and she knew without a doubt that it all started with dirty dishes. But what came next was a new life, a new love, and a chance to live fully again. As Rose sat on the porch one evening, the soft glow of the setting sun casting a warm light across the yard, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. The simple act of sitting with Mark, sharing a quiet moment at the end of a long day, felt like the culmination of everything she had been through. She had spent so many years taking care of others, her family, her husband, her children, and somewhere along the way she had lost sight of herself. But now, at 67, she had found a new beginning, a new sense of purpose. She wasn't just living for others anymore. She was living for herself. Her life hadn't gone as she'd expected. She had never imagined being alone, never imagined starting over after losing Tony. But life had a way of surprising her, of teaching her lessons she hadn't been prepared for. She thought about the days when she had felt invisible, when she had felt forgotten. She thought about the loneliness that had settled in after Tony's death, the quiet house that had once been filled with laughter and love. But then came Mark. She smiled softly, thinking about their first meeting, the strange man who had been coming into her home at night, the fear, the confusion, and the eventual realization that he wasn't a stranger at all. He was someone who had been broken by life in the same way she had. And as they began to build something together, something she hadn't thought possible in the years since Tony's passing, Rose realized that love had a way of finding its way back into your life, no matter how many years had passed. Mark had shown her that it was never too late to open your heart again, to allow yourself to feel, to love, and to be loved. They had both come from different places, different struggles, different heartbreaks, But in each other, they had found a connection that transcended everything they had lost. And in that connection, Rose had found herself once more. She thought about her children, too. Bobby, who had been so worried about her, and Trish, who had initially struggled with the idea of her mother finding love again. But over time, they had come to see it, come to understand that Rose's happiness wasn't about pleasing anyone else. It was about her. It was about reclaiming the parts of herself she had lost and finding joy again in the simple act of living and the food stand. That little stand, so small but so meaningful. It had started as a way to make a living, but it had grown into something more. A symbol of Rose's resilience, of her ability to start over, to create something new. It wasn't just about the money or the customers. It was about her. It was about proving to herself that she could still make a difference, that she still had the strength to build a life from the ground up. Looking at Mark, who was now standing by the garden, tending to the plants they had started together, Rose realized just how far they had come. From the first awkward exchange to this quiet, peaceful life they had built side by side, every moment had brought them closer, not just as a couple, but as individuals who had learned to trust, to forgive, and to love again. "I've learned that it's never too late to start over," Rose said softly, as if speaking to herself. To love. To live. She had been given a second chance, and she was determined to make the most of it. The past had shaped her, but it didn't define her. She had been through the pain of loss, the uncertainty of aging, and the struggle to find herself again. But now she understood what it meant to truly live, to embrace the good and the bad, to cherish the moments of quiet joy, and to never give up on the possibility of a new chapter. For so long, Rose had wondered if her best years were behind her. But now she knew the truth. Her best years were still ahead of her. "If you're watching this and feel like life has passed you by," Rose said, her voice steady but filled with hope, "know this. It's never too late. Start living now." Rose stood up, her heart light, and walked toward Mark, who turned to smile at her. She took his hand, feeling the warmth of his touch, knowing that, together, they had found a new beginning. It had started with dirty dishes, a small act of kindness that had set everything in motion. But what came next was a life full of love, of second chances, of joy. And Rose knew that no matter what came next, she was ready.